Hi, I'm Bob McCoskrie. We are back after a week off for King's birthday, and we are rearing to go. We are still waiting for the cheque from New Zealand On Air and the government for providing you with public interest journalism, although I'm not sure we'll ever actually get to see it. So this is our 11th episode. You'd think we'd be getting better at this, but well, you be the judge. Welcome if you're watching on our website, YouTube channel, Facebook, LinkedIn or Twitter. And if you're on Facebook or YouTube, you can share your comments to the panel and submit any questions you may have. They are already coming in. Now, just before I come to the panel, here is the newspaper article of the week, which comes from Stuff, who reported that a Greens candidate in Wellington, someone by the name of Stephanie Rogers, launched her campaign to be elected as a Member of Parliament by pole dancing. That is not what you call politics, that is called politics. Ka-chung, you get that? So this is probably a perfect opportunity to welcome, stop the groaning, Christine. This is probably the best opportunity to welcome Alfred. Alfred, have you ever pole danced when announcing your candidacy?
No. And
thankfully.
No, we used to look at different types of polls, the opinions of people, but I don't think anyone I knew jumped on a pole.
Good. I'm glad. I'm glad for the poll as well, Alfred. Right below Alfred is special guest Brendan Malone, my favourite second Conservative after Bruce from the South Island. How are you, Brendan?
Oh, that was too kind of you to say, Bob. I was going to say that was the strangest Polish dancing that I've ever seen.
Very good. Ka-chung. Ala, you've got a... Ala Pomalele is back with us. And Ala, nice to have you. How many weeks countdown till the big arrival?
3 months now. 3 months and
3 months to go. Okay.
Yes.
Okay. Very exciting.
The honeymoon period.
And directly below, Christine Rankin. How are you, Christine, in Taupo?
Hello, I'm very well, thank you.
Okay. And back to the South Island, Bruce Logan. Bruce, how are you?
Hello. Hello, Bob. Hello.
And we want to welcome to the panel our very new member, Dr. Cherie Trotter, who holds a PhD in history from the University of Auckland, is a researcher, writer, co-director of the Indigenous Coalition for Israel, co-founder of the Holocaust and Anti-Semitism Foundation here in New Zealand. Her IQ level is higher than the combined IQ of me, Alfred and Brendan. Cherie, nice to have you on the panel.
Thanks, Bob. That's a very nice welcome. Thank you.
and just for those who may be interested, you're coming from up north, aren't you? You're sort of in the sticks. Yeah. Okay.
Near Mangawhai, between Wellsford and Mangawhai, in the countryside.
Okay. Nice to have that representation. Right, the topics tonight. ACT recently delivered their State of the Nation speech, so is ACT a viable option for social conservatives? National leader Christopher Luxon said we should have more babies. What a shocker. We also check out the polling for all the minor parties, not just the ones that the media report. And is it time to either ditch or change our MMP voting system? And we might even get time for a short cold shower if the government gives us permission. Let's get straight into our free speech moments. And what was my order? I had them. The order team is Brendan, Bob, Bruce, Cherie, and Alfred has asked for the last spot. I think he wants to save the best till last, or he's still preparing it. So we'll figure out that once we get to that. He's Googling. So Brendan, we're going to start with you and your 90 seconds. You want to speak on employers wanting to sack people because they don't like their opinions. Your 90 seconds starts now.
Now, some of you may have seen this article that appeared in Stuff yesterday morning, and some employers, some corporations are asking for some new powers that they don't already possess to sack people who express political views in the workplace that they don't agree with. Let me read to you directly from the article as one example. An employee who stridently supported Donald Trump could be just annoying, but vocal support in the workplace for the violent January 6 insurrection and storming of the US Capitol could be potentially harmful to the well-being and safety of other employees. So in other words, you could sack them for that. The first thing I thought of was, well, could strident supporters of Biden be possibly annoying? Or maybe people who supported the Black Lives Matter protests, which routinely erupted into violence? Could that be potentially harmful to the well-being and safety of other employees? I imagine that a lot of people who work in retail might feel so that was the case because of all the looting that went on. Here's the thing for me that I find so frustrating about this, not just the injustice of this idea, if it was allowed, but also we are talking here about intruding into one of the last vestiges of communal engagement that we have with other people on a regular, ongoing basis of varying political viewpoints, as a general rule, the workplace. And we are talking about turning that into a monoculture, a place where if you're a conservative, you maybe don't feel safe anymore with a progressive boss. If you're a progressive, you don't feel safe anymore with a conservative boss. So what's going to happen? We're going to end up with lots of echo chambers where conservatives will work only for conservatives, progressives will work only for progressives, and this destructive tribalism and political silos and echo chamberism would just worsen in our society. It would pour petrol all over the issues that we're already having. And here's the last thing I'll say about this. Aside from the injustice of this, I don't know about you, but I don't want to live in a dystopia of blandness. I actually want to live in a world of eccentric people who believe crazy ideas so that we can have interesting conversations. I might not always agree with them, but there's something far more interesting than living under the tyranny of bland political monocultures where everyone becomes a brain-dead zombie in a political hive mind where eccentricity and alternative views are verboten. Not for me, and I hope this idea dies in the water very quickly.
Well done, thank you, Brendan. Perfect, 90 seconds. All right, next up is Bob, and your 125 seconds starts now. This week is Schools Pride Week. Children as young as 5 will be exposed to Pride, a political movement which is now targeting kids with radical and extreme sexuality and gender ideology, and overseen by the government-funded charity Inside Out, which is part of Rainbow Youth. There'll be stickers to celebrate transgender, non-binary, gay, lesbian, bisexual, pansexual, asexual, aromantic, based on the kererū. Yes, apparently they think the kererū bird is a pride symbol. For kids, there's an all-inclusive colouring book about gender and sex on a spectrum, the gay flag, kinky boots and colouring in drag queens. And then the recommended books to read for young children include George, about a boy who knows she's a girl, and one called Ask Me About Polyamory. But here's a program which really confirms just how radical it all is. Schools Pride Week drag panel, School Them, on Thursday, this Thursday for young teenagers. Join us as we sashay our way into the diverse drag scene about artistry, identity, representation and pride, featuring Will Smackintush, Jack Swallows and Miss Gina. Now, these are images from their public web page, which children will quickly find, and I apologise that they are highly offensive, but the concept is also offensive to many families. Contact your school and see whether they're observing Schools Pride Week, and if you have any concerns, keep your children at home for the week. Hoping for the best is no longer an option. Protect your child's moral innocence at all times. Bruce, your topic is favourite books on the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which sounds riveting, and your 90...
I'll try hard.
And your 90 seconds starts now.
When you get to live as old as I am, you reread things, and I've just reread one of my favourite books and definitive texts, The Universal Declaration of Human Rights, A World Made New, by the American academic Mary Ann Glendon. She wrote it in 2001. It's a big deal, but I'll content myself with just one issue. The Declaration presumes that we share a common dignity and should be treated as such. It went through several contested drafts, but to placate every national delegate, the only universal foundation was rejected, that human dignity is a consequence of our creation, male and female in God's image. The closest they could get is all men, being members of one family, are free, possess equal dignity and rights, and shall regard each other as brothers. The French philosopher, commenting, Jacques Maritain, said, "We agree about the rights on condition that no one asks us why." Actually, they didn't agree about the rights at all, but that's another story. So my claim is, there's no universal foundation for human rights if we reject the biblical God as creator. And so we're plagued by parasitic human rights claims under the mantra of diversity, that mindless intonation driving everything, that we must be free and equal at the same time. But we can't. In the real world, they exclude each other. We are unequal in intelligence, skill, desire, and attitude. Have you noticed? To demand equity for everyone, that is, equal outcomes, undermines the dignity and freedom of each citizen. The mushrooming state, growing in the dark, spreads its soft creeping tyranny, and so we get neither equality nor freedom.
Well done. Thank you very much, Bruce. spot on, because you had to define for me what was the UDHR, Universal Declaration of Human Rights. So,
Oh, it's a long time. It was before you were born, Bob.
well, maybe just. Anyway, moving on, and we're very excited. Our newest panellist, Cherie Trotter, and Cherie, your topic tonight is integrity, and well, we might give you slightly longer than 90 seconds, just because we're very nice. But your 90 seconds starts now.
Okay. Well, one particular headline caught my eye the other day. Does Michael Wood have enough integrity to be a minister? Political commentator Bryce Edward listed 6 transgressions that Wood had committed in not disclosing that he had shares in the Auckland airport, which as Transport Minister is highly problematic. In fact, he had ignored 12 reminders that he needed to disclose these shares. So what is integrity? According to the online Cambridge Dictionary, integrity is the quality of being honest and having strong moral principles that you refuse to change. Now, I can respect a politician whose views I may disagree with, but they're consistent in their beliefs. But when a politician whose values are theoretically close to mine fails to stand up for those values, this is a lack of integrity. And this is what integrity does not look like. Pledging to resign on an issue you personally don't support simply because it's politically expedient. It was bad enough that Christopher Luxon censured one of his MPs for making a Facebook post, "Today is a good day." Now he's pledged to resign if the abortion law changes under National. Perhaps Luxon should be reminded that more than 90% of public submissions oppose the law change. In my view, when it comes to integrity, Michael Wood's misdemeanour pales in comparison to Luxon's unwillingness to stand for what he professes to believe.
Well done. Thank you very much, Cherie. And finally, we come to Alfred. Alfred, you've had 4 times 90 seconds. That's 360 seconds to figure out what to say. So your 90 seconds starts now.
Yeah, well, you got 125, and so, that's really interesting. But look, I had read the other day, and I know people may think that's a bit nerdy, but I read the Independent Electoral Review report that's just come out, and now they're asking for submissions. That's right. Bob would never read it because he'd get bored with it. But in actual fact, Bob should read it, and we should all read it. Why? Because there's some things in there that I think that are really important, and we need to be cognizant and conscious about what could change in our parliament if some of these recommendations go through. So first of all, it talks about the Electoral Act needs a complete rewrite. So straight off the bat, they're now starting to say there's a wholesale change that they believe needs to happen. They talk about the fact that it's old, it's clunky, it needs to be modernised, new language and so forth. Whenever he says that, you've got to start being worried, because now they're trying to warm you up to the reasons why you should be supporting these types of changes. So here's a few things, first of all. So one of the things they talk about, in order to make it more equitable and accessible for different generations, and particularly for Māori, they would like to reduce the age from 18 to 16 years of age. And their point in saying this is that they think it's really important because there's a number of young people in our communities who, by the way, took time off school just to go to a climate action rally, but they believe it's important to give them accessibility. But here's the thing that I thought was quite concerning. They started to say that it'll be better for Māori because the age group is 16 to 17. They had no evidence for that, but they're now trying to use that to disguise what they think there should be changed. Here's another change they wanted to introduce. They said that at the moment, the current threshold for minor parties, for any party, is 5% of the party vote. Their recommendation is 3.5%. Now, if you think that it's been hard enough to get rules and legislation and policies through Parliament with just the 5 parties we have at the moment, can you imagine what Parliament would look like with 120 MPs? Oh, by the way, that's another change they want to make. They want to increase the number of MPs on the per capita of population. So we could go from 120, which we've had for nearly 165 years, to possibly 160, 180, who knows where it would end. So look, there's a whole lot more than there. I can only get as much as I can because Bob's only given me 90 and he gave himself 125. But can I say this? It may be nerdy, it may sound like a bit boring, but you've got until the 17th of July to put in a submission to look at some of this and to speak out against what I think are some real concerns about these recommendations from the Independent Electoral Review Office.
Okay, very good. And actually, we're going to come back to that topic and get a bit more discussion. So you've set it off nicely. Right, let's get into our first official topic. And that is that David Seymour, ACT leader, recently did his State of the Nation. He talked about the cost of living, the government's bloated spending, our current account deficit, education insurancy, crime and increasing prison capacity, and separatism and race-based policies. He also highlighted problems with the public health service in New Zealand and said that ACT would stop the war on anything private. But his big announcement was a new ministry, a ministry of regulation. Their sole responsibility would be to police the rules and regulations that ministers are constantly foisting on unsuspecting Kiwis just trying to get ahead. And he says, and I think this is the interesting statement he makes, he says, quote, Labor is promising to make it worse, faster. National are promising not to rock the boat or scare the horses. Only ACT is promising real change and real solutions. So the questions just for the panel, we sent the panel the speech so that they could have a Sunday nap. And so the question is, what do you like about ACT's policies and what don't you like? And are they a viable option for social conservatives? So, Ala, I might start with you if that's okay. What did you like? What didn't you like?
I'm not a David Seymour fan, so I'll just say that off the bat. But I'm only familiar with the education policies. I think I like some of the truancy stuff. They talk about re-empowering schools and mandatory reporting of attendance by schools. I think, and I like their big one, whereas they want to reduce MOE by 50%. So they want to cut back on the bureaucrats, which I highly agree, because no one really knows what MOE does other than use up our taxpayers' dollars and then get paid more than teachers to, I don't know, still don't know what they do. So I like some of their education stuff. I think they've got a big push around reducing bureaucracy in the public sector, which I think sounds good because we still don't know what they do as well. So I like those parts, but I haven't really looked into their other stuff as well. But I like some of their education things.
Okay, Christine, what did you like? What didn't you like?
Well, first I want to say that I do not look to any politician for my spiritual or moral guidance or inspiration. So when I vote, I'm not looking for that. I know that it is an absolute waste of time to do that, and so that is not in my mind. I want to save my country because at the moment we're in disaster mode. I have to say I liked everything on their list. I love the fact that they're going to repeal Three Waters, utter and absolute waste of money and a disaster. The Maori Health Authority is health is about to tip over. Watch what happens when we go into the middle of winter. But there's not one single thing on that list of change that I disagree with. I think they need to be part of a right-wing government. There are things I don't like about them. I don't like some of their moral stands on things, but I don't believe that we're going to be able to fix that or change it with our consolidated vote. And for me, we've got to save our country. So it's right-wing all the way for me. Don't disagree with any of their policies on the list.
Bruce, positives, negatives?
Well, I quite like a few things about his policies. I do find it a bit strange that he wants another ministry to sort of get rid of regulation, which seems to be kind of an own goal. But however, we'll forget about that. And there are things that I do like. I like his bring back charter schools. I think charter schools have been poorly understood and they are valuable. I like also his overturn oil and gas ban and build more prison beds seems to be necessary from what I can understand. And I like the idea of repealing the Zero Carbon Act. I think that's something that has to be done. And repeal Three Waters, obviously we've already talked about that. And of course, built into his Ministry of Regulation, bring back bureaucrat numbers back to 2017 level, he says. Well, the bureaucracy's increased hugely, and I would like to see that. So I like all these policies. But I've got the problem when I'm voting this year. I think it's a matter of who I hold my nose least against when I'm voting.
Okay, Cherie, what was the positives for ACT and what are the negatives?
Well, in general, I like the idea of less government and more personal responsibility. And so I think the idea of cutting red tape is good, if in fact that's what they end up doing, because I do think that the amount of red tape we have in all kinds of sectors of society has impacted our productivity, and I think he argued for that pretty well. One thing I dislike is his approach to treaty issues. I think they're short-sighted and simplistic. They certainly appeal to populist sensibility, but I don't think they do justice to the issues. And I would preface that by saying I think the current government has done a poor job of informing, educating and engaging the public on issues like co-governance, which has turned out to be so divisive, but I think ACT's approach is knee-jerk reaction. For example, he says that he's going to take treaty references out of legislation. So this is legislation that's been built up over the last 50 years, where there are 62 separate acts of parliament that include Treaty of Waitangi legislation. So how is he going to do that? What kind of process? Is it even possible? It just seems very reactionary and knee-jerk to me. So in terms of voting for him, I can't get past the fact that he's the euthanasia guy and supports abortion. And I do think these are foundational, fundamental type issues that have a huge impact on society as a whole.
Right, thank you. Brendan, I think, can I also add the other question for you to kick us off, not only the positive and negatives, but is ACT an option for social conservatives, given what Cherie's already alluded to, as social conservatives, ACT are terrible?
Yeah, they are. They're libertarians, not conservatives. And I think also, like Cherie was saying, I'd actually agree with a lot of what she said there. And I think Seymour is the king of the gimmick. However, I also find myself agreeing with Christine that we've got a regime that's doing great harm at the moment. And so the question is, it's almost like a hold your nose and vote sort of situation. But for me, I would never give my vote to ACT or to Seymour. I look at that list, and one thing that's really obviously missing for me is, where's the free speech policy? This is supposed to be one of his key policy planks. Where's the actual cogent freedom of conscience policy is what I'd actually be looking for. And the bureaucracy stuff, again, okay, well, let's create a ministry to deal with too many ministries. That's creating bureaucracy to deal with bureaucracy. That's like giving the inmates run of the prison. And on top of that, taking bureaucracy back to 2017 levels, where's the vision? Where's the coherent philosophical concepts for what a proper functioning government should look like when it comes to subsidiarity and respecting the local community and ensuring they are empowered to actually govern themselves well? And going back to 2017 levels for me is not enough. There needs to be a coherent philosophy about the fact that we have become swamped by the bureaucratic managerial class, and it's not a good thing. And it sucks the life out of a society. It probes in places it doesn't belong, and it makes us far too dependent and far less empowered. And I think we've got to have a recovered vision for what authentic governance, particularly for empowering the local, actually looks like.
So, Alfred, just finally, I mean, David Seymour, he's pro-legalising cannabis, he's pro-abortion, pro-euthanasia, pro-conversion therapy laws, he opposed parental notification for teen pregnancies, supported gender ideology and birth certificates, opposes banning street prostitution, wants to liberalise Easter trading laws. Can a social conservative look past those to the ACT Party, in your view?
Well, the long answer is no. You know, the thing is that this is a classic. So he's the guy that's been playing club rugby, if you're using an analogy, who believes that he's good enough to play in the big leagues. And so what I mean by that? I mean, when you look at this manifesto and these policies that he's announced, and I agree with Brendan. You see, the thing is that people actually absolutely supported the work that he did around free speech and so forth. But you see, what he's trying to do is that he's broadened his appeal, try and get as many votes as possible to get as many bums on seats, people inside the House of Parliament, to show that he deserves to play in the big league, and that he can basically be able to determine, obviously not just with National, but how he can determine some of those policies. I can tell you this now, having been there before, there are a number of these things like repeal Three Waters with National. Yep, that's a big tick. If they get in, they'll change that. They'll repeal it. How they repeal it will be really interesting. But there are a number of these that I think you'll find there are things he can get across the line very quickly, like charter schools. We supported it. Remenda came through with Rodney Hyde. So it's not hard. The 3 strikes rules, 90-day trials, those are what you get done in your first 90 days. But the bigger things, I think, are the things that he's going to struggle with. Why? Because he is part of that far right side of, I suppose, politics that people then start to brand. And don't forget, it's in the league of the fact of, it's the audio of speech. It's all of those things that came with what they would see as far right. It's discriminatory. It has all those elements to it. But as far as a social conservative, absolutely, you can't vote for this guy. He does not hold any of those values. And I hear what Christine has to say, and Brendan, look, we don't vote them on their social values, but it's the same thing too. You've got 2 things at play here. Is it situational ethics? Is it the lesser of 2 evils? Absolutely not. We've got to be better than that. But the second thing is, does it matter in a person's conscience? Because you see, their social values also reflect the values of leadership. Because if the value of life is something that he doesn't value, then I can tell you this, he can tick and have a program that says we want to have better health, but underlying that, his own personal values will permeate everything that he does. Can't be trusted, in my view. I wouldn't vote for him.
Okay, let's. I'm just going to do a bit of a test on the panel because I just want to see how bright you are. And so I'm just going to show you a couple of ACT MPs. Panel, who is this? Great start.
ACT MP.
Yeah, well done. Good start. So that is Damien Smith. Anybody know what portfolios he holds?
No.
Right. Gee, you guys are hopeless. Okay, let's try this one. Who's this?
I know.
Another ACT MP?
Tony Severin, who's Associate Small Businesses, Disability Issues, Corrections. Can anybody help me out on this? Who's this?
He's a farmer.
Yeah.
Oh, good guess.
Yep, it is Mark Cameron, Developments and Fisheries. I thought you guys were into politics. Who is this one?
What her name?
I know
Karen,
her, but I've forgotten it.
Yeah, Karen Chow, I think is how you say it.
Yeah.
Child poverty reduction, children's social development. You guys are terrible. Last chance. Who's this?
Don't know.
Pass.
It is James McDowell, immigration. I guess the point I'm making here, team, is that David Seymour has done a very good job of fronting and keeping all his MPs in the back. I mean, how does he do that, Alfred? I mean, how do you run a party with so many MPs and yet keep them completely off the radar and still be popular?
Well, don't forget when Winston Peters for New Zealand first came in 2011, he didn't know who half his caucus was, right? So let's not put the heat on the panel when the leader of a political party doesn't even know who these people are. I mean, something's got to be wrong. It's really smart. It's really easy. Don't forget, like New Zealand First, a lot of these parties now are built on personalities, right? Mm-hmm. And so if NZ First, if Winston falls over, right, it's going to be very hard. You can't expect Shane Jones. The same thing at the moment now. And yet there was Roger Douglas, there was Richard Prebble, Rodney Hyde, but now we've actually got David Seymour. And if he continues to build, the party will be built on one person rather than on the party's values.
Okay, I'm sure we will come back and talk more about ACT as we head towards the election, but let's keep going. The newspaper article screamed, National leader Christopher Luxon says we should have more babies. National Party leader Christopher Luxon was at an infrastructure conference in Christchurch, and he was answering questions about New Zealand's immigration settings while outlining National's infrastructure policies, and he said, quote, immigration's always got to be linked to our economic agenda, and our economic agenda says we need people. I mean, here's the deal. Essentially, New Zealand stopped replacing itself in 2016. I encourage all of you to go out there, have more babies if you wish. That would be helpful. And so the left on the Twitterverse were horrified. The media went ballistic, as we'll see shortly. And because of Luxon's views on abortion, this was the perfect storm. Luxon was trampling all over the reproductive freedom of women. It was shocking. But Jack Tame was actually interviewing Luxon at the time, and he said this: the comments were totally lighthearted, made in the context of a conversation about labour shortages, and the pressures of an ageing population. But was Luxon correct? Well, actually, he is. There's our fertility rate, and it's been declining basically since the year I was born, and it's well below the replacement of 2.1 now. It's currently about 1.65. And the reason for that, part of the reason, is that women are delaying having children. Now, we've actually released a report on this in 2019, which said we need a younger population to provide a retirement fund for Bruce and for me as well. And if you have a declining fertility rate, then you've got a reliance on migration, and young people are needed to pay my retirement allowance. Now, sadly, team, when Nicola Willis, the deputy leader, was asked about this by a feral media who were just going for the jugular and so angry that Luxon would dare suggest that we need babies to survive as a society, yeah, I know, radical statement, Willis didn't push back on them. Have a listen to her response.
In New Zealand?
No, obviously that is the decision for individuals depending on their desires and their family circumstances. I think what you're referring to is a joke that Christopher Luxon made, and that I understand people. Well, I understand that people who were there laughed at the joke.
What about the people that were watching?
Look, jokes are to be determined by the people in the room, and I don't think anything was intended beyond that.
You don't think that reflects his position?
Look, I wasn't there to hear the joke, but what I understand from those that were is that it was seen for what it was, which was an offhand remark.
And it's not National's position that people need to have more babies in New Zealand?
That is not National's position. We will never be a party that tells people what the right size for their family is. That is a matter of individual choice, of family choice, and we respect that.
Okay, so she didn't actually answer or deal with the big policy issue, which is the implications of a declining fertility rate, which is where the real question needs to be, because every country has, or most countries have a declining fertility rate, and we're all competing for the same immigration market. Now, just before I come to you, panel, just to discuss this, here was the worst bit. A TVNZ reporter at that interview asked this question to Nicola Willis, and it wasn't shown in the video clip, but this was the question. Is Christopher Luxon aware of Lebensborn and Hitler's experiment on this? Mm-hmm. Now, for those not aware, Nazi authorities created the Lebensborn program to increase Germany's population. Pregnant German women were deemed racially valuable, were encouraged to give birth to their children at these homes, and during World War II, the program became complicit in the kidnapping of foreign children with physical features considered Aryan by the Nazi. In other words, what the media were doing was linking Luxon, talking about babies, with Hitler. That's how bad our media has gone. Right, let's go around the panel. I'd actually like to come to you first, Cherie, just because of that link there, somehow saying that if we talk about fertility rates, we're talking about Hitler's master plan. Was Luxon right to raise this whole issue around fertility?
Well, the indications are that it was a light-hearted comment from Luxon, and I think the comment by Kushla Norman was abhorrent in comparison with Nazi policy. And I think it just shows the kind of zealotry from the media, and they're so driven by the ideology that they have longevity. They're lost and comment what it was. As to your question about should we be pursuing this, I do think that's a question for each and every family. And I don't know the statistics, but I would imagine that Māori Pasifika families are much larger than Pākehā families. And that might be, I might be wrong, but just from my experience, that seems to be the case. But I can understand why a lot of families today are actually reluctant to have a lot of children because of the cost of living, because of housing issues. So it's a complex question. You know, I don't think there's a straight, easy answer to that.
And Cherie, you were just cutting out just in your first statement, but I think you were basically saying the media's losing their objectivity. Is that what you were saying?
Yeah, yes. The point I was making is that the zealotry of the media, they are behaving like ideologues, you know, that they're driven by these ideologies, and they need to step back and show a little more objectivity when they do their reporting. And I think in that way they would have interpreted the comments in a reasonable and sensible manner.
Okay, Ala, as our beautiful pregnant mum on the team, was Luxon just stomping on your reproductive rights with this terrible statement of his?
Absolutely not. I'm glad he brought it to the forefront. I think I was more disappointed looking around in that clip that a majority of the reporters were women. And this is, I don't know if it's a generational thing, but to echo Cherie's point, obviously there are a plethora of reasons why women are having babies later on in terms of being more educated, more opportunities to participate in the workforce. I think in our context in New Zealand, if we kind of look closely at the fertility rates, Māori and Pasifika have lower age. They're having kids at younger ages. I think it's a reflection of values as well. I think if we don't value marriage or kids or children or generational living, those things aren't going to transfer over to how people live their lives. I also think people are just more selfish. We live in a world, obviously a broken and sinful world, and people are generally going to now put their needs before a family. And that's not to say having a family isn't is easy or seamless, but there are sacrifices to be made. And so I just think those conversations are being overshadowed by this sort of me-centered world we live in, and especially in light of feminist movements over the past 10 to 30 years, where this glorified movement of having no children and sort of this glamorous life. But obviously there's an individual choice and biology plays into that. But I think there's this sort of hacking away at the family unit, and families they're a core tenet of societies in the West and not in the West. So it's troubling any time we hear North Korea's got an increasing fertility rate over the West. I think people need to pay attention to this. So I'm glad Luxon whilst it was a joke, I'm glad it's bringing attention to actually a really dire issue that's going to have huge implications in the next 10, 20 years, and that's not too far down the track.
Christine, were you offended by it? I mean, can politicians talk about our low fertility rate without somehow seeing it as a slight on women?
Of course they can. I mean, all of us make up our own minds. Sometimes we don't get the choice of making up our own minds. Nature takes that over. He has every right to raise that. It might have been a joke, but I think it was a really important point, and it's something that, of course, we should be talking about. The thing that horrifies me is the reaction of the media. That is woke, disgraceful behaviour to link it somehow to a Nazi regime. I'm just embarrassed. What kind of people are we putting through journalism school, and what the hell are they being trained? It just, who are they getting their guidance and ways of doing things from? Because I thought the media had changed a bit, and there are some very good journalists out there, but by golly, there is a big group that are way, way below par. I find that very embarrassing, actually, that they would dare to draw such a conclusion. I just feel that we are so out of control. You step out of line and they're going to come up with something really big to get you.
Well, Brendan, the bit that sort of got me was that rather than the National Party actually saying, well, hang on, grow up media, we need to discuss this, our fertility rate is a problem, they buckled under the pressure and just said, oh, it was just a joke. Aren't they the losers in this whole debate?
Well, I'm kind of shocked by that and surprised by that, because this problem is a serious crisis. And I can't understate that. There's a very good book that people should read called Empty Planet, The Shock of Global Population Decline by Daryl Bricker and John Ibbotson. And these guys have no ideological dog in the fight. They just looked at the data a couple of years ago and published this book. And this is a global crisis that we're heading into. And so literally 10 days before Luxon made his comments, The Economist, highly regarded Economist magazine, published an article titled Global Fertility Has Collapsed. That's how serious this crisis is, and they're saying this is a problem, and they looked at the various proposals, and they've said immigration is not a solution because it's a global problem. There's not going to be enough people to import into your country, and so they looked at other options, like Singapore has been offering incentives to people to have more children, and this highlights what Ala was saying. They just haven't taken them up. People are not having kids, even when they're incentivized to do it. And so the economists, they said, well, the best we can hope for, we think, is that AI will come up with a solution how you can run an economy without young taxpayers. And so I'm looking at this and I'm thinking, all of these people who just 2 weeks ago were complaining about National's policy of pointing out the obvious, we're going to have to raise the super age to 67 because we don't have enough young people to pay for it. And then they're attacking him when he says we need more young people to actually pay for these things. Now, AI, I'll tell you, it will come up with a solution, but it will be absolutely barbaric, and it'll say you need to increase the availability of euthanasia. That will be probably one of the solutions, something like AI would come up with. And so there's some very real issues here. And by the way, I think part of it is that the media obsession with climate alarmism is not helping. Ironically, one of the things that Daryl Bricker and John Ibbotson point out in their book is that as the population declines globally in such a massive way, the issue of carbon emissions will decrease massively. It just won't be an issue anymore because there won't be enough people around to actually emit or create carbon. And so that issue is not the pressing issue. This is the pressing issue, and National and everyone else needs to get their head in the game because we've got a lot of elderly people who need us to be there for them. And if we can't afford to help them, they're going to be in really dire straits.
Okay, Alfred, well, can we deal with the elephant in the room? And that is that I think the media went after Christopher Luxon, not because he raised a good point, but because they saw this, they could connect this to his views on abortion, the surcharge on contraception. They say they're going to reintroduce the small charge. So this was just a chance for the media to go after Luxon and his conservative views that sometimes he holds, as Sri says, depending on who's listening.
Yeah, and it proves the point that you've had, Bob, and others have talked about it, where there's such a strong left-leaning, sort of bent towards the media. We've talked on this panel many times about things that Green MPs and Martima Davidson, things that, it's outrageous what they got away with. And yet somehow they give them a free pass every single time. And so here's him going after Luxon. But to prove the point, look, this happened in 2013. Michael Bassett wrote a book on housing affordability. It was good, priced out. And look, there are three things that in particular he talked about. Projected population growth, and we weren't building enough houses. Second one was metropolitan urban limits. I know that's the conversation now people are talking about. But one of the things that came out, which he wasn't looking for, it was a trend that emerged out of the research around housing, was the issue around the breakdown of the family. And so what happened is that it came out through the trend and the data of the divorce rate since the 70s had tripled. And so what does that mean? That means overnight you double the demand. Simple as that. So supply could not keep up with the demand. I said to Michael Bassett when he released the report, did anyone want to talk about that third issue that emerged? And he said no. He said politically no one wants to talk about it. He even released it to the media. Not one media outlet wanted to produce that data. Why? Because it's seen as a judgment upon a nation. So guess what? I started talking about it. Not as a form of judgment, but if that's the reality that we're dealing with, then what really is the questions? If that's the answer that we're currently dealing with, what's the questions that we need to ask around our families? What do we need to do to help families stay together, love one another, care for each other? There's a whole variety of things. But the point that I suppose we're going to is this. Media at the moment will only put the things that they believe are important to them. We're afraid as a nation to have courageous conversations that I think are really important. And I believe it's platforms like this that we can actually have these courageous conversations, start putting out what I think are really important issues for people to talk about, because the media certainly aren't going to talk about it. They're not going to talk about the birth rate, which, by the way, if you want a good example, Angela Merkel, during that period of time, 10 years ago, do you remember what they did? The birth rate in Germany had declined so low, their answer was immigration. Guess what happened? They've got massive social issues. I've been over there. I've seen them. I've talked to politicians. They say to this, we should never have done that, but we did because we were desperate at that point in time. It's a great example of what not to do. And so let's have the conversation.
Okay, Bruce, can you figure out why we're not allowed to talk about something like fertility rates and family replacement and, continuing basically the human race?
Well, Christine has touched on it, and so has Brendan, and probably others as well. We do have, it would seem, an uneducated media. Not everyone, of course, but generally speaking, it would seem to be the case, who don't really seem to understand that reproduction is necessary if a nation is going to continue to exist. Can I give you an example from a country that I know something about? France. France is a country with an extremely low replacement rate. It's not replacing its French people, but Islam is producing itself at a furious rate within the French borders, and within another 15 or 20 years, Islam will overwhelm the French identity in the whole country because the French people are not reproducing themselves. Now, it seems to me to be a no-brainer that reproduction is absolutely essential. The Japanese are in trouble because they're not doing it. And of course, we know the story about the Chinese. And why on earth we had this crazy reaction by the media, I understand that they're ideologically driven, but I was disappointed with Nicola Willis's response too. She didn't seem to understand, or if she did, she didn't enunciate it, the difference between what I would call government policy and political reality. Government policy is one thing, but the political reality is that we're not having children, we're not producing ourselves, and that brings about all the problems that everyone's been talking about. And it seems at the root of it all is an ideology that seems to be overwhelming and stopping people talking about what seems to be a very obvious common sense issue.
All right, let's move on. And one place where there will be a lot of talk about common sense issues will be at the Forum on the Family. That was a nice little segue into my ad for the Forum on the Family, 30th of June. There's also the gala dinner on the 29th with ex-Deputy Prime Minister of Australia, John Anderson, who is doing some fabulous interviews and commentary. But as you can see there are some great speakers, including Lila Rose, who will be coming live from California because she's only got a 1 and a 3-year-old. We just couldn't persuade her to get on the plane, but we will have her for an hour live from California. There's also Kevin Sabet, who will be talking about the marijuana issue because, of course, the left are not going to let up on that particular issue. The Greens certainly aren't going to. And Walt Heyer, the detransitioner, talking about this whole transgender issue. So you need to register because registrations close in just 2 weeks. Go to forumonthefamily.nz and we would like to see you at both of those events. Right, we got a bit of feedback last week, team, and it was basically that when we were talking about the latest polls, that the media are not telling the full story around minor parties, and therefore they could be potentially influencing the outcome of the election. Now, we had a look, and those concerns are partly right. So let me show you what they're talking about. So here is the poll of the minor parties in the last One News poll. And you'll see there that top, actually 1%, Democracy NZ 1%, Cannabis Party 1%, New Conservative. But then if you go to the full data, you will see there, and I have put a yellow arrow beside some of those smaller parties. In fact, Opportunities Party was actually 1.4, but you've got Democracy NZ, you've also got New Conservative on 0.6, Freedoms New Zealand on 0.55, which is a combination of a couple of parties, Vision New Zealand, Freedom New Zealand. You've got the New Zealand Freedom Party, Outdoors and Freedom Party, 0.2 there, and then one party which wasn't actually showing on that particular poll. So as you can see, some parties are being excluded, and that means that people may not be aware of them, depending on whether the media report them at all. And of course, then when they go out polling, people don't even know that the party exists. So I guess, Alfred, I might come to you because you've followed polls for a long time in your political career. Firstly, should we believe the polling? And is there a danger that the media misrepresent it and skew the results because we don't know about some of the parties in the poll?
So the answer is no, we shouldn't always follow those polls. Second question, are we being misrepresented? Yes, we are, because as you can see, they pick and choose. It's like, for instance, when they talk about preferred prime minister, they'll just throw in any name, any person, because it just mixes things up. What concerns me is that for such a long time, it begins to control the narrative of how people see that the only options for them are these particular parties. And I think that's important. I did say a couple of weeks ago on this panel that there's another polling which is called Ipsos. And if you follow that, the important element of that is actually talks about what are the critical issues, because it's the issues that people are more likely to vote on the emotions about what particular political parties will address these particular issues as well. So I think that's the thing that's really important. The last thing I'd say, though, is that, just because it's what people want, is it really what the nation needs? Now, that's another conversation, because often what we're being fed about saying, look, this is what people want. They want to talk about these issues here. So it's about, at the moment, it's the big critical issues are about the living costs, right? Financial issues that people are dealing with. It's about crime, and then it's about housing, health, and so forth. Those are the key things that are there. So those are issues, but you have to also ask underlying what is underneath that. Now, that's a bigger conversation. So, but just in regards to polling, I just think we just need to be very careful. I don't think it's going to be quite as simple as we say.
Okay, Brendan, I mean, minor parties are always going to find it difficult, aren't they? I mean, remember, there's been all these battles for them to get on the debates and to actually be part of it. Unfortunately, it is an uphill battle for them, isn't it?
Yeah, I don't know about how it's the polling's going for minor parties. I do think, though, that I've got this funny sneaking suspicion that the polls are not telling the full story with the bigger parties, though. There's so much frustration amongst so many people about this current government and what's going on. I struggle to believe that come election day that there will be a Labor victory. I think something's not quite right here. However, I want to pick up on a point that Alfred made, and I think it's really important that we are supposed to be under an MMP system, and I've got faults to pick with that system, but that's what we're supposed to be operating under. But effectively what's happened is, I guess the media and the big political players have decided that even if it's in some unspoken way, that effectively, no, we'll carry on with basically a sort of a de facto first past the post, plus maybe a couple of secondary parties into the mix as well, who will be the sort of partners in it. But under an MMP regime, why should we focus on the two main parties as the primary players? There is a big question here, I think, that really does matter. If you're going to have MMP, then have MMP. Don't have a system where it's two big parties plus a couple of hangers on. I think that's a really big pressing issue.
Okay, and that's actually going to be our final topic just coming up. But Cherie, so for the polling, I mean, do we watch the media report the polls, or do we really just need to keep focused on the policies and just vote on principle?
Yeah, well, I think there's quite a big distrust in the media anyway, and I think people tend to look around. There are lots of different outlets now for getting your news, and I think a lot of people just don't rely on the mainstream media for their news. So, I mean, I think I see some of the minor parties and what they're doing through social media, and a lot of them seem to be travelling around the country and getting their message out that way. So, yeah, all power to them. See how they go.
Okay, Christine, you were involved with the minor party back in 2014. Uphill battle, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely terrible. Colin used to really fight to be part of debates, etc., and he was often left out of them. It was very difficult, but we still came very, very, very close in a very short period of time. So it can happen. But I think when the minor parties are sitting where they are at the moment, I don't think they're going to have much impact. We've got 4 months to go, and it takes, as I've said before, it takes millions and millions and millions of dollars and a very sophisticated campaign to make your mark. I also don't trust. There's something wrong. I absolutely agree with Brendan. Everywhere you go, I think there's going to be a right landslide. And I don't think the polls are reflecting that. There is something wrong.
Okay, Ala, can we trust the polls, or do we need to look past them?
I think echoing what everyone said, those polls are to be taken with a grain of salt. But I think Cherie mentioned social media. I think we're underestimating the power of social media as well. Obviously, the majority of mainstream media is state funded, so clearly they're going to be left leaning. So I think Brendan's mentioned the power of the local. So I wonder if this is an opportunity for minor parties to get creative with how they campaign and use social media. Social media is free game in some ways, and perhaps we can turn those low budget but blessed, hopefully. But I'm hoping social media plays a key role in this, and not just, I think everyone's over mainstream media because a lot of them are drinking delusional Gatorade. Or maybe there's a big well of it somewhere, maybe at NZME. But yeah, I think this is an opportunity to get creative with campaigning and to use social media. I think we're really underestimating the power of social media and amongst all this as well.
Yeah. I mean, Bruce, the polls have sort of given an indication. The danger is that people use them as a basis on who to vote for because they don't want to waste their vote, for example.
Yeah, well, they can do that, but they should know, and because it's fairly evident that polling is not an exact science. It's not, as it's been proved in various parts around the world. But when it comes to minor parties, they have a simple marketing problem. And it's one of the reasons I think Seymour has been so successful. The simple marketing problem is if you're a minor player, you've got to say something to make people take notice of you. And you're in danger often of saying something's a bit outrageous. And you get taken notice of, but then you tend to shoot yourself in the foot by the very fact that you've said something outrageous, you've got noticed, but then people think, oh no, I can't go for them. And one of the reasons that I think David Seymour has been so successful is that he has managed to say things that are good marketing ploys to a particular kind of audience, and he's been successful. And that's why he's the noise in the party. And he's managed to make his marketing very effective. And as I said, it's very difficult if you're a small player to do that. Very difficult.
Okay, let's just quickly, folks, we haven't got too long, but just the final topic, and that is that expert panel came back. Alfred alluded to this, and here's basically what they recommended for MMP. They said they want to reduce it from 5% to 3.5%. Now that means instead of needing 150,000 votes to get the 5%, you only need 105,000. So that's 45,000 less votes. So that's actually quite significant. They want to lower the minimum voting age to 16. They want to cap political donations to a maximum of 30,000. And they want a referendum because they want us to put up with the current government, not for 3 years, but for 4 years, which sounds really groovy. So of those four options there, Brendan, what's the ones that you could live with and the ones you definitely wouldn't live with?
Don't reduce the voting age, fool's errand. Reducing the threshold, I'm not convinced about that. But if you're going to have MMP, then we've got to figure out something about what that means at the lower end, and I don't think we've got that right. And the 3 to 4 years, actually, believe it or not, it's frustrating if you've got a regime that you find dislikable. But in actual fact, I think it would be more beneficial for politicians to actually, they spend the first year, as I understand it, bedding in, and then they've got 3 solid years to actually prove themselves, and I'd rather have that.
Okay. Sheree, of those 4 on the list there, which would you keep and which don't you like? Oops.
Well, I would consider lowering the threshold because currently, moral conservatives don't have any options. But then you don't want the situation like you have in Israel where you've got a 3.25% and you've got 12 parties and you can't form a government. So a bit of a balance there. And definitely don't lower the age. We all remember what we were like at 16, so that's not a good idea. And what was the other one again? I've forgotten. Sorry.
It was
3 to 4
the
years.
referendum, 3 to 4 years.
Yeah, well, I heard the argument on this, and because we don't have backstops, that 3 years is a way of protecting our rights because we don't have, a higher court and those sorts of things. So I'm a bit hesitant about going to 4 year. I'd stick with the 3 year.
I was interested to hear you say that, what was it, Israel, 3.25 is it for the threshold?
Yes. Yeah, and looking back at our statistics, there were a couple of times when our Conservative parties got 4%. If we had a 4% threshold, then we might get some more Conservatives in there.
Okay, and I just saw this quote from Waterborne who said, I understand in Germany, on which our MMP system is based on, that only the highest polling party can form the coalition. So if we'd had that rule, Winston would have had to have gone with Bill English, and Bill English would have been the Prime Minister. So that might have solved the problem. Ala, what's in that list that you would keep and you would dump?
I like the idea of putting it to a referendum, the increasing parliamentary years from 3 to 4. Definitely no to lowering voting age. If we look at our literacy and numeracy levels at that age, we're declining. So I don't think that'll transfer to a fully informed vote. I think the threshold, I think in 2012 they did a similar review and they gave 4%. So I think lowering it, but not to 3.5, I think 4% is a balance to give other minor parties a go. I know it'll create a proliferation of minor parties, etc., but I don't know. I think it's worth giving it a shot.
Okay. Christine, that lowering of the threshold would really give impetus for minor parties, wouldn't it? Because it's you sort of get a bit of inertia when you get to that, near that 5, eh?
No, I think the 5 is right. The only thing I agree with is the 4-year term, and it would have to be decided at a referendum. The rest is supporting left-leaning parties. Don't want any bar of it. Don't agree with Liberal Party, Bob. You know me full well. There's no point in trying to guide me in the opposite direction. It's not going to happen.
Okay, Bruce, multi-choice, which of those 4 do you like and don't like?
Well, I don't like the 3 to 4 year term. New Zealand doesn't have an upper house, and I've always understood that 3 years is a good backstop to that because we don't have an upper house. And if you increase it to 4, you're actually increasing government power. You're giving the government a great deal more power than it already has. So I would be against increasing the period from 3 to 4 years for that reason. And of course, I wouldn't lower the voting age. I'd raise it. You know,
okay. What would you raise it to, Bruce? 74?
25.
Two children minimum.
Well, anyway, the Athenians couldn't vote until they were 35.
Oh, okay. Let's see. I was close. Okay, Alfred, if we changed it to 4 years, you would have had another year of limousine service as a cabinet minister. That's got to be a plus.
Yeah, well, it's an interesting conversation. I remember in Parliament, it was one of the things that John Key and Bill English tried to have a conversation with the other parties to try and get that 70% agreement across the line. Look, one of the things that were just kept on coming up time and time again is that it was the fear factor. People were afraid that, and you imagine now, Christine, others have said it tonight, right? Could you have imagined 4 years under this current government, right? We would have hated it. But I go back to, I think that what Bruce has actually said, and I've reflected on this, I believe we've got the balance right. We've got the age right at 18. We've got the threshold right at 5%. Because look, compared to Israel, that's 9 million population. We're only 5, right? And I think that the percentage we have is right. So look, what does that mean? I think the most that we've had in Parliament is about 6 minor parties. Well, sorry, 6 parties altogether, 2 major and 2 minor parties. We've got 5 at present. I believe it's the right balance. Look, having been in there, it's hard enough trying to get legislation and policy across with 5. Can you imagine if we went to 7 to 8? It's just ridiculous. And then you can have as many Conservatives in there as you want, but still you're going to have to haggle to try and get things across the line. I think there's so I believe that the balance is right. The last thing I'd say is this, though, and Brendan was saying it, a lot more eloquent than I was saying it, but there's a thing about the MMP. We haven't really been truly operating under an MMP system. You are right. If we'd actually adopted, and we did have a review in 2012, the people didn't want it. They wanted to stay with the status quo. It was to propose, in one sense, the option that Germany has, right? Whoever is the major party in regards to who has the majority of party votes gets to determine who their coalition partner is. And that would have been different. That's the only thing that I believe that if we were to change something, that should change. But the last thing I'd say is this, is that, I think that there's a conversation around minor parties that they can influence, because the message to the major parties, to the bigger parties, is this: you can't just live on an entitlement to believe that it's either one or the other, it's left or right, it's red or blue. And that was proved in 1983. Remember Bob Jones of the New Zealand Party? He turned around because he hated Rob Muldoon. He said, "Oh, well, stuff you." He'd have public meetings where there'd be 3,000 people that turn up. Now, he influenced that election, not just him, but obviously Rob had fallen off the wagon in a whole lot of different ways. But it proved the point that to these major parties, don't take those other votes for granted. I believe we're at that point now. We're back to the whole referendum in 1993, where people lost trust in the current system and the respect of Parliament, parliamentarians and politicians. And they believe that the issue of integrity and honesty and truthfulness is truly up for question. And there's a lot of people out there, good people, and I suppose I'd say that, on the other side of the right legislation, because that's right, I'm a centre-right person, who are saying we don't know who to vote for. As a social conservative, at the moment, it's probably the most difficult time. And you've got other people in the major parties saying, well, if you vote for a minor party, it's a wasted vote. No, it's not. Because sometimes it's not about whether you get across the line, is that do you want to be like we don't want to be like Bob Jones, but do you want to send a message to these major parties? Actually, you need to stop for a moment. Do you really value the social conservatives of our country? Because at the moment, I don't believe they do.
All right, great place to wrap it up. We've got 4 months to figure out the answer to what you're saying. So you've got us going on that. I can hear Ronji yelling in my ear, I want to go to bed, Bob, and it's over time. And he's not even on the panel. So special thank you to Dr. Cherie Trotter, who did a fantastic job, and thank you for being our first time on the panel tonight. And also to Brendan Malone for coming off the bench, super sub, really appreciate that. And to our regular panellists, thank you. We will be back next Monday night with more Straight Talk at 8 o'clock. Have a great week and we will see you next week.
Yeah.